Hello, this is the front-end web development class. My name is Jeffrey. We're going to start on our recap. It's been a week or 2 weeks since we've last had class. Last 2 weeks we were talking about jQuery. But I also want to have a little bit of a recap on using the command line because in this class we're going to be using just a little bit of the command line, typing a few things in. So I want to make sure people are up to date with that sort of thing. If anybody has a Windows laptop and they're not already set up with Git, I recommend installing it because it comes with a good command line, which when using it is going to kind of mirror exactly what I'm doing on my Mac. So if you are even if you're using Mac OS, make sure you have Git installed. Not that we're going to use it, but it's good to have. Anyway, if you are using Windows, you can, I think, you can download it, yeah, from right here, I think. And it will go ahead and, gitsem.com. And it will go ahead and download it and come with something called Git Bash, which you can select. Then you can go ahead and open that, and that will be your command line. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do specifically with Git. It's just that people use a certain kind of terminal along with Git, and that's what you're going to have installed. So, but if you are using Mac OS, then you're pretty much set already, or Linux. So, right, what was I going to say? I'm going to go ahead and open up my terminal. I use iTurn. You can use terminal. They're all pretty much exactly the same. And as usual, when I connect to the NoiseBridge network, I see a host name that is not actually my computer. This is not an Android phone, but for some reason I'm being given this name by NoiseBridge. It's just some weird trickery that's going on. It's not harmful. So all we really need to know is just how to navigate from folder to folder. As you probably know, whenever you've got a terminal open, this terminal is working within the context of a specific folder on your computer. My terminal is kind of fancy. It's got some blue and green and some other decorations like a little pizza emoji. But there is a little tilde right there that I've just selected. And that tilde is pretty much shorthand for the name of my home folder. So going pwd, typing in print working directory, pwd, it shows you what your current folder is. And users Jeffrey W is just the longer name for tilde. So cd is really the command you're going to be using most often to move from folder to folder. Cd stands for change directory. So if I wanted to change directory to, say, tilde, well, it wouldn't bring me anywhere because I'd still be in my home folder. Cd, users, Jeffrey W, same thing, same folder. But if I listed out what was in this directory, ls, and then I went ahead and said, cd, temp, then all of a sudden now I'm in temp. As you can see, my little terminal has changed. tilde/temp. ls, I don't know what that is. Anyway, and then to go back to your previous, go up one directory, that is to say, you went into the temp directory to go back out, you do cd space ... And ... is always referring to the parent directory. So if you go into temp from your home folder, you go cd ... to go back. Yeah, so there you go. That's pretty much all I really wanted to cover. What we're going to be doing is using another tool that we're going to install using the command line and creating a new folder. But I want to make sure that you create the folder wherever you want it to be created. Maybe you don't want to mess up your whole home folder with all this stuff like I have. So whatever, create a code folder like I have, but for some reason I'm not using, or whatever. It's up to you. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Oh yeah, I also said for this class that there is an additional step to set up, and you might as well go ahead and do it right now, which is to download both Node.js and Foundation. I'll talk about specifically what Foundation CLI is when we start the class, but essentially what Node.js is giving your computer the ability to run JavaScript files outside of your web browser. In the last few classes, we have talked about running JavaScript within your browser, but it is a full-fledged programming language, and you can run applications written in JavaScript outside of your browser, and that's what Node.js allows you to do. So if you guys just go ahead and download the latest release, the current latest features version, that'll work out. And then from your terminal, you go ahead and type this in, npm install -g foundation-cli, Or on macOS, you might need to start that with sudo. So there you go. Sudo. What this does is uses something called the Node Package Manager, which is something that comes with Node, to download a package called Foundation CLI. -G basically means install it globally, make it so wherever you are, whatever folder you're in, you can use this Foundation CLI anywhere. Sudo stands for super user do. Sometimes you might need heightened privileges to be able to do things in certain places, and sudo allows you to do that. It might ask for your password after you run that, because that's the definition of heightened privileges. What is Foundation CLI? Again, I'll talk about that in half an hour. It's not a virus, so I don't give you viruses. Trust me. Yeah, that's about it. Otherwise, as usual, the usual setup is to go ahead and make sure you have a good text editor and web browser, and Git, like I said, Git for Windows. Is this Git for Windows -github.io? I wonder. Might be the same thing as what you can get from Git on Git SCM. I'm not sure. And then Git class materials. You can do that. We're not going to be using the class materials, any previous ones today, so you don't have to download them, but you might as well for later, especially if you know how to use Git. Cool.
Is there a page where I could get that last instruction to install a node?
Oh, yeah. If you want to, if you want to ever look at those instructions that I've got, they're part of the intro presentation. So right here, intro presentation, and it'll just bring you to this. Or you can just go to jhw.ux/fwd-slides. That's the shortcut, basically, for this slide presentation. And so here you go. That's it. Number slide 6. Yeah. Okay. Right. What else did I want to talk about? Well, I think I want to talk about JavaScript and jQuery a little bit, since we're going to be doing a little bit of that. Any questions before I begin? Anything they need to know? Yeah.
To update Git, do you recommend doing it how often? Like once a week? Or?
You mean you mean update my repository or update Git itself?
No, the repository.
Oh yeah. I mean, no reason why not. I mean, whenever you're working with a repository that someone else is like me is maintaining, you might as well always CD into it and do a Git pull to make sure you have the latest stuff. So I don't know. I would say on an average of once a week I make changes to it, so that's good.
Cloning it only has to be done once.
Yeah, cloning it only has to be done once. Cloning it is downloading the full thing, where pulling is taking all the most recent changes and just merging those changes in. So you do that from within the folder. You do a git pull once you CD into the FWD directory. So if you already have it, then git pull will just make it up to date. If you ever get any conflicts when pulling stuff from my repository, that means that you've made changes to the repository that have conflicted with my version. So I would recommend, if that's the case, just deleting the entire repository and re-downloading it, because dealing with Git conflicts is kind of messy, and you shouldn't have been making any changes in there in the first place. So there you go. Everyone okay with the temperature? I always kind of overheat a little bit when I'm doing a class, so just making sure since the windows are closed. Okay, we're good.
Good question.
Yeah.
When installing Node,
yeah.
Does the question make sure that your /user local bin is in your path? Is that something you have to respond to?
Are you installing that with Brew, or did you?
That's the website.
Sorry, Mac users, you don't need to download Git. The way that Mac users should download Git, I think that I have it written here, is not to go to the thing and try to install it, but instead, for Mac OS, just open terminal and type Git, and that's all you have to do. And if it's not already installed, then it will install it for you by just typing the word Git.
And with the Node installation?
With the Node installation, you do have to go to the site and download it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what are they requesting with the user local bin and the $path?
Oh, so this is the Node installation you're talking about, not the Git installation. Is it telling you to make changes, or is it asking you?
Just make sure that user.
I don't know. I mean, user local bin is where is essentially a place. It's actually not user, it's USR, which stands for something else, I forget. Okay. USR local bin is a place where certain stuff is installed for anybody on your computer to work with. It's just kind of some third-party stuff that's installed in a place where you don't need heightened privileges to work with it. It's nothing that you should necessarily mess with, but I think it's just making sure that that node has access to that just in case it needs to install anything new. At least that's what I think is happening. So you should be fine. Yeah. Okay. So any other questions about getting set up? Make sure you have Node installed. And once you do that, make sure that you install Foundation. You don't need to do this slide. Just run this command and you should be good. Okay. So let's also talk about jQuery. So I'll just make a quick run through of the code that we wrote for the past 2 classes. It'll just give us a little bit of a reintroduction or a little feeling of what we've been doing for the past few classes. So this is the point if you want to go ahead and inspect this on your own computer that you download the previous class materials, or you can just take a look at what I'm doing. I'm just going to be poking at it, so not actually making too many changes. So just watch if you feel like it. Series 10, class 7, that was last week. Okay, so index.html. Here's our Twitter application. So what we did was, well, visually, what we made changes to was there's automatically a count of how many characters are remaining for you to type into this text box. And also we added these buttons here, and I was lazy and I didn't add them here and there, but I could if I wanted to. The behavior that we added, though, is the fact that this number counts down as we start typing into this field. We also did something where as we start pasting stuff, the number starts to get into the negative, and all of a sudden this little button becomes disabled. We basically created a little bit of form validation where as the button becomes disabled if the character count inside the text area drops below 0. So yeah, we also made it so the tweet button would be disabled if the character count was exactly 140 because we don't like submitting blank tweets. We also created these buttons here, like and retweet, and when we click them, they change colors. And then you click them again to make them not change colors. Furthermore, of course, we had the ability to add a tweet. And we also made it so when you click these buttons, you can make those happen too, even on a new tweet. So that's all the changes that we've done. That's all the actual interaction and behavior stuff that we've done. So to see the code behind the scenes, I'm going to go ahead and inspect this, go over to sources, and click on app.js, and take a look at the code. Let's do it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, I think. Hello? Is it going to let me zoom in? Oh, it's just doing that thing where it's really, really slow. Okay, whatever. So what do we got? The deal with jQuery is that well, actually, let's start with the HTML before we even look at the the JavaScript. I viewed source on the document, and down at the bottom, it's the easiest way for me to see the HTML that was downloaded. And down here at the bottom, I've got 2 script tags right before the end of the body. These script tags, in order, one of them loads up jQuery, and the other one loads up my code, the code that I've written. jQuery is what's known as a JavaScript library, simply because it is something that's downloaded that other files depend on. So it provides us with additional behavior, but it doesn't necessarily do anything right out of the box. It doesn't make any changes, cause things to magically appear, or just start to happen without us having to write our own code. So it's really just a tool that we install by downloading it first before we start running our code. So now that we have our code, now that we have jQuery, which I've gone ahead and downloaded from jQuery.com and then linked via this script tag. Now we've got app.js, and what jQuery has given us is this $sign. This $sign variable is a function that, when called, finds stuff on the page. So these first 2 lines are going ahead and finding certain things on the page. We say $sign, we call it and pass in a string like form or text area, and it's going to go ahead and look throughout the document for elements matching this selector, form or text area. What I mean by selector is CSS syntax, where anything like this, just the word form or the word text area, refers to elements on the page that match that name. Whereas other selectors, like things starting with dot, are finding elements on the page that have a class of tweet rather than the element name of tweet. So that's some CSS-y stuff that we talked about much earlier in the class. So we've got our form, we've got our text area, we have also set a character limit of 140. So these are all just some variables that we have access to. So next thing that we're doing is we're calling the on function on a few things. So form.on, we've got text area.on, tweets.on, tweets.on again. I probably could have set tweets as a variable instead, so I didn't need to find it twice, but I was lazy, I guess. But what does on do? Well, every time I run on, I pass in two things. The first thing I always pass in is a string. Submit, key up, click. These are events. What on does is it listens for events on the page. And events happen to certain elements on the page. So specifically, the form gets submitted, or the text area gets a key up. That is to say, lifting your finger from the key on your keyboard while you're focused inside the text area. Tweets, you can click on this whole section here called tweets. This whole thing. So when you click on that whole section, we do some special stuff. So up here at the top, we've got our submit event. What happens is that when you submit the form, this function gets called. So what we're doing here is we're providing a function to be called later. Essentially, jQuery is going to hold on to this function, the whole thing that I've highlighted, to be executed as many times as the form is submitted. So what happens when the form is submitted? The first thing is that the default is prevented on the event. What does that mean? Well, when you submit a form by default, if we had JavaScript turned off entirely, you'd still be able to submit this form, but it would try to send the data off to somewhere on the internet. Whatever the form's action is. We'll talk about forms specifically. We'll have a whole class about it in a week or two. But when you submit a form, it tries to submit to a specific place. We don't want that to happen. We're actually pretending to do some internet-y stuff. We're not actually sending this data off anywhere. So we want to prevent the default from happening, which keeps us on this page, prevents the page from being reloaded or loading a new page. So that's what event.prevent default does. Then we go ahead and get the value of the text area. I'm actually going to skim through a little faster since we've seen this before. I'm going to find the first tweet on the page, make a copy of it by doing clone. We're going to remove stuff like retweeted or liked, which cause these things to become green and red, because we want our new one to not be retweeted. Then we want to find certain parts within the tweet, like new tweet.find tweet time is going to take our newly cloned tweet, find the time, and change its text to now. We want to change the content and change the text to whatever the value of the text area is. See text area.val, new tweet value. Then finally, we want to prepend our new tweet to our tweets list. And that's this whole thing. Prepend meaning putting it at the beginning. Actually, sorry. Forgot to do this. Okay. So yeah, every time we submit the form, all this stuff happens. Oh yeah, also the text area val becomes blank, which means it simply gets set to nothing, So there you go. That whole thing just happened. Next, we got a function called calculate remaining characters. Calculate remaining characters, as you can see, is being referenced 2 more times. We are defining it here. We are passing it in to this key up listener, and we're also calling it immediately on line 34. So what happens right when the page loads is all this stuff runs, including line 34, which calculates the remaining characters. So that means when I load this page, this function has already run. And you can tell because this little area here called the tweetbox counter has been set with how many characters are remaining in the text box. Of course, the text box is blank, and the amount of remaining characters is the character limit minus the text area value.length, which is 140. So that's 140 minus 0 is 140. And we set the tweetbox button to disabled. We set its disabled value to this statement. This statement is very large, but what it eventually turns into is simply a true or a false value. what we're checking here is whether the remaining characters value is less than 0, or, that's what these two little pipes are, or if the remaining characters is equal to our character limit, that is to say, if it's 140. So if either of these things is true, then this whole thing becomes true, and that's going to be the value of disabled, true. If both of these is false, then the whole value becomes false, and so we're setting the prop of disabled to false. So that's how that works. Right now it's disabled, but as you can see, when I key up on this text area, that is to say I type into this and lift my finger from the keyboard, then all of a sudden it sets the remaining characters value differently, and it also makes this same little logical thing again and sets it to true, to false, because neither of these is true, which means we can now press this tweet button again. All right. Yeah, so that happens immediately when the page loads and also every time we lift our key from the keyboard. Finally, we have this tweets.onClickRetweet function. Okay, so this is like these on calls up here, but with one additional change, which is that we're actually passing in 3 arguments into our on call. First, we've got our event, click. Then we've got another selector, and then we have the function that gets called every time this thing happens. What's this middle selector mean? Why do we have this string in the middle of this string in this function? What's happening here is that we're saying, hey, tweets, this entire section, not just this tweet, but all these things, this entire section, when you get clicked, if the click happened to land on an element with a class of retweet, cause this function to happen. So that sounds a little roundabout. Why are we telling this entire section to listen to for a click on something inside it? Can't we just tell the thing inside it to listen for that click? Well, here's the problem. Right now, we have one thing on the page with a class of retweet. It is this button right here. It has class retweet. But when I add a new tweet, now I have 2 things with a class of retweet. Because remember, it cloned this old one? This one also has a class of retweet. The only problem is that if we were to add this on-click listener to all of the retweet buttons on the page when the page loaded, it would only attach to that first thing. Even if we cloned that first element, the event listeners don't happen to appear on things that have been cloned, things that have been added into the document. So in order to listen for clicks on things that don't exist when the page first loads, we have to make sure that we're adding the listener to something that does exist when the page loads, which is the whole tweets container. So we're basically saying, you, tweets container, listen for clicks, and if they happen on anything with a class of retweet, as this click occurs, see if the thing that has been clicked has a class of retweet. That takes away the necessity of this retweet button being on the page when you first load it. It doesn't matter. It's just looking for, as you click it, if that thing has a class of retweet. And then we call this function, which goes ahead and takes this context variable. This is a special variable that exists within every function. And so whenever you're calling a function, you can refer to this. But the value of this changes based on how that function is called, based on what specifically is calling this function. In this case, this refers to the button that was clicked. We need to know that because there are multiple retweet buttons on the page. We can't just find all retweet buttons and set them to retweeted, because we want this to happen. We don't want clicking this to have both retweet buttons to turn green, right? So by using this, we're referring to the specific button that was clicked. This value, though, is not that whole jQuery wrapped goodness that has all those additional methods on them, like closest and toggle class and on and whatever else. So in order to add all those special methods to it, we need to wrap it inside this jQuery function once more, like we're doing here, which gives us an array of that button that was just clicked. Now we can run methods like closest to find the closest parent of the button that has a class of tweet. The closest parent of the button that has a class of tweet. So starting with this retweet, we go up to the parent. Does this have a class of tweet? No, it has a class of tweet details. And we go up again. Does this have a class of tweet? Yes. So that's the closest parent with a class of tweet. So we toggle class of retweeted. That is to say, if the tweet has a class of retweeted, we remove it, and if it doesn't, then we add it. That's what toggling is. So yeah, why aren't we adding a class to the button itself? Why are we adding it to the tweet itself? As you can see here, the tweet itself gets a class of retweeted even though I click this button. That is because we might want to look for all articles on the page, all tweets on the page that have a class of retweeted. We might want to style other parts of the tweet differently, like give the whole thing a green background or something like that. It just gives us a little bit more flexibility to be able to add the class to the topmost thing that really needs it, you know? And besides, it's not the button that has become retweeted, it is the tweet itself that has become retweeted, right? So that's, you know, if you think about it from a conceptual standpoint. So that's why I added it to that. And what I've got is a little rule in my CSS that says an element with a class of retweet inside another element with a class of retweeted gets a background of green. So it sounds a little roundabout, but there are good reasons for it. And the more you work on this sort of stuff, the more you'll understand why that's the case. Again, if you don't fully understand it, do it yourself. Start doing actual projects and understand. You'll see sooner rather than later. Any questions at this point? Yeah.
I'm still confused by this.
Okay.
And, so you don't ever have to define this is, as long as you put in it, it's almost like saying whatever, everything else in quotation marks before this, that's what this is.
No.
Whenever you use this, you know exactly what it's referring to. It's the stuff.
Well, the thing that we don't know specifically is how, well, I mean, we could find this out, but we don't know or care specifically how jQuery is setting this function up and calling it. All we know is that when we call on, which is something that jQuery has given us, we're passing in these three things. And what jQuery is doing is storing in a little internal array a list of functions to be called whenever this thing gets clicked. So when it does get clicked, it goes through that list of different functions, this being one of them, and goes ahead and calls it. I could probably go into jQuery.js and look for the specific place where it actually calls it. The way that it calls it is that it does it in such a way where it's setting the value of this as it calls it. I think it's probably using a special thing called apply. What you take is a function like this function right here that we're passing in, and you say dot apply to the end of it, and then whatever you pass into this is basically what this value becomes. So for example, what I mean is instead of saying, like, let's say that we've got var do something equals function okay, so now we've got do something. Okay, so what I just created is a little function that when called alerts what the value of this is. And I just went ahead and said do something. And what it did is it popped up a little weird thing saying object window. When you don't specifically define what this is, then by default it becomes the thing that called it, which in this case is the whole window. The window that we're in is what has called this function. But if instead of doing do something parentheses, I do something dot apply hello. And what I've just done is change the value of what this is. So that's probably what jQuery is doing under the covers. It's going ahead and passing in as the this context variable the button that was just clicked, so we can make use of it. So again, I know this isn't necessarily an adequate explanation, but it's something that you probably have to work on yourself to fully grasp. But what's happening under the covers, essentially, is that jQuery is defining, passing in what this specifically is. And we're just trusting that jQuery is going to refer to something on the page that has been clicked that we can go ahead and make use of. What we know is that the thing that's being passed in is going to be something with a class of retweet that's inside something else with a class of tweets. So that's a good start. And then from there, we can do whatever we want with that or things surrounding it. So, you know, basically, when you yourself create a function that makes use of this, and you yourself call that function, then it's up to you to define what this is. It's essentially another argument. It's just like calling another function like, var add equals function a, b, return a plus b, add 1, 2, right? This is a function that takes 1 into 2 and returns the addition of those two, right? But do something is similar, but by calling apply, I can not only define what a and b are by specifying multiple things in here, but I can also specify what this is. So, I could say add dot apply is the this value, and then 1, 2. And what I'm doing in this case is basically calling this function, also defining what this is, which is pretty much ignoring because, as you can see, this function is not making use of this. But I'm still passing in 1 and 2, and it's applying this thing. So again, it's yet another way that under the covers, jQuery is making use of this function, calling it, passing stuff in, and that's probably the specific thing that's happening, and that's what's being called. So that's pretty much the extent to which I can explain it. If that doesn't make any sense, then it's okay, because chances, especially in this class, I'm not going to be calling any functions that later on use the this value that's been passed in. It's just sort of a little bit of a complexity of jQuery, which you can safely ignore because the idea behind it is that you're just making use of every time you create this function that you pass into on, it's always referring to the element that has been acted upon. So that's all you really have to care about in this specific case. Okay, let me see. Other questions online? I forgot to start up my little chat thing. That's not it. There's also a YouTube live chat thing, which is also somewhere else. I wonder if anyone's using that. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna just make sure I have this thing open. Live events, where are they? Hello? I don't know. Jeez, this is a new thing for me, using YouTube instead of Hangouts on air, so my live events, there we go. My live events. Live now. Live control room? Is there a chatto thing? Chat? Open live chat in new window? Cool, there it is. Okay, so I'm just gonna leave that up there. This is very inelegant, but I hope that anyone who's chiming in, who's tuning in, if anybody, didn't actually notice if anyone's. Oh, no one's zoomed in, so whatever. Okay, so let's start with new stuff. Unless anyone has any other questions. Yes.
I have a question about the tweets that are being created. So whenever a new tweet is created, the timestamp is like now.
Yes.
But then as time passes on, it won't be now. So how can we factor in the time duration?
That's complicated. I would recommend, well, probably what Twitter does is it has a little timer that it's running. A little thing that goes off maybe every minute that basically goes through every tweet that's currently listed on the page and has some sort of internal concept of what the actual value is. It doesn't have a value like 1 hour or 2 hour or an hour or something. It is actually probably storing that value somewhere else. And what it does, it goes ahead and takes that value and formats it yet again to the relative time to now, and then replaces that value on every tweet. So yeah, that's probably what's going on. I wouldn't recommend creating a function that generates all that sort of converts an actual date to so-and-so days ago, so-and-so whatever ago, because not only does that become very complicated very fast, but you also have to factor in multiple languages or whatever else. One good library for that is called Moment.js, which parses, validates, manipulates, and displays dates in JavaScript. So it's something that you can download, and you can go ahead and, this is a bad site, let's just go to momentjs.com. Go ahead and use moment.format so-and-so, and it'll take today's date. or moment.format so-and-so, or take, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do here, but I really don't want to get into it. It's a little bit complicated and not within the relevant thing. But it's possible. You probably need an external library to generate those dates for you. So yeah, right now it's just going to stick it now forever. Okay, so other questions? All right, let's get started with new stuff. I'm going to take a drink of water real quick. Okay, hi, this is the front-end web development class. We're going to talk about foundation today, or starting a new project. So I've taught this class a few different times, and every time that I teach it, I recommend a different tool to get started with something. But when it really comes down to it, what I mean by get started is I usually don't recommend what I've been doing in this class so far, which is starting from very, very scratch every single time, writing out your doc type, writing out your HTML element, your head element, your body, your so-and-so, linking up your scripts, linking up your CSS, whatever else. Not that I don't recommend it. I mean, it's good practice, but it's not something that I do when I start a new project. When I start something new, when I start a new site, a new application, new something else, I'm usually working off of some sort of boilerplate code. Some code that someone else has written that provides me with a really, really nice start. And that start, again, it's not very complicated, but it's a nice, increase in productivity by an hour or something, because it gives me a place to start creating my HTML pages, or make new versions of the same HTML page, because they give me a little template. It's created a folder in which to put my CSS. It's also given one for my JavaScript. More complicated boilerplates also come with things that allow you to watch for changes to files and immediately reload them in your browser, or watch for changes in special kinds of languages like Sass and ECMAScript 6 and other stuff that we haven't really talked about yet, and compile them whenever anything changes so you can get the latest stuff. So I last time around, you might have seen this, or might have even tried to install this before, because it was on this slide before this week, was something called Harp. I taught Harp.js last time, but it is somewhat of a testament to the speed at which things change. This no longer works with the latest version of Node, because something in Node has changed. If you guys just installed it, you downloaded version 6 of Node, and this was not built to work with version 6 of Node, and this project hasn't been updated since April, which doesn't sound like very long, but in the world of high-tech web stuff, and especially the Node world, it's ancient. So I can't teach with this because it doesn't work for the things that you guys installed. But what this does is goes ahead and runs a little server on your computer. A server is essentially something that sits, it's a little application that's running in the background that allows you to access it via your network, your local network, or the web, or somewhere else. It's the same thing that the servers are running that you're downloading stuff from all the time. But it's just something that allows you to start up a little server and see what it's actually going to look like by making requests to your stuff. It also goes ahead and initializes a project, which, like I said, creates a little boilerplate thing, creates an HTML file, CSS file, JavaScript file that you can start adding stuff to, so you can get started from there. It also probably sets you up with an easy way to start pushing stuff into Git, an easy way to build this into a static site that can then be uploaded to some sort of place. But I haven't even started talking about static sites yet, so I'll skip that for a second. But again, as I said, it doesn't really work. I also, last time, talked about Bootstrap, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. Bootstrap, the most popular HTML, CSS, and JavaScript framework for developing responsive mobile-first projects on the web. So this is a framework. That previous thing was also kind of a framework. It's a static web server. So what's the difference? What is this? Well, Bootstrap is something that speeds you forward in terms of not having to reinvent the wheel when it comes to creating things like nav bars, buttons, nicely styled forms, error messages, drop downs. I don't know, the list goes on. There's a whole list of different sorts of components. Navs, navbar, breadcrumbs, pagination, labels, badges, these nice icons here, Jumbotron, alerts, progress bars. You just scroll down and you'll see a lot of nice looking stuff that just like works. And Bootstrap is great for projects where you don't 100% need to care what it looks like. What I mean by that is that, well, every website is a unique snowflake, of course, but there are a lot of projects out there where you don't need to create like the most unique branding experience that anyone's ever seen. Your stuff does not need, in many cases, to be completely unconventional. Maybe it needs to have some nice colors, a different color scheme, but it doesn't, you don't need to hire an entire design team to create a simple application or a simple site even that, just has some information and has multiple pages. So Bootstrap saves you the hassle of writing a lot of CSS and writing a lot of JavaScript because it gives you all these sorts of different components. It also gives you some nice JavaScripty components like transitions between pages, or sorry, I'll skip that. Modals, like the ability to open up a little dialog box that looks like this. Tabs that change things as you tab between them. Even cool things like carousel where you can, slide between things. All that stuff is there. It's already written. It's just something that you download Bootstrap after you download jQuery, because jQuery is actually a dependency of Bootstrap. And then your code can depend on Bootstrap, which depends on jQuery. And you can just go ahead and use it and start basically taking its little code snippets, like copy and paste this sort of thing, and start making your HTML changes, and it will just work if you've got it installed. So why am I not talking about Bootstrap today? Because this is version 3 of Bootstrap, which as of a week ago has ceased development. That is to say, the guy behind Bootstrap has said, we're done with this. We're going to start working on Bootstrap 4, which actually has been in development for over a year. And it's kind of in this in-between state where I want you guys to learn the latest and greatest Bootstrap 4, because Bootstrap 3 at this point is 3 years old. But Bootstrap 4 isn't ready yet. It's an alpha. It's a little difficult to deal with right now because they really haven't ironed out all the kinks. So yet another victim of the very, very fast pace at which the this development world proceeds. So while I do recommend this, and I have used this for different projects, I can't really recommend it right now. So what are we left with? Well, a competitor to Bootstrap, I wouldn't call it a competitor because Bootstrap is open source, and this next thing is also open source, is Foundation. Foundation.zurb.com. Foundation is another responsive front-end framework. It has Foundation for sites, tutorials, classes, custom training. This is actual classes. We don't want that. Foundation for sites. Let's learn around Foundation for sites. What can it do? Getting started, building blocks. It's got things like, let's take a look at the building blocks. It's got callouts and image character. No, I'm sorry. Hold on a second. Is this stuff that they have made, or is it stuff? I can't even really tell. These are like little template things. Oh, here we go. HTML templates. Real estate or travel. No, that's not it either. That's like full-on sites. Kitchen sink. Oh, there we go. Every single Foundation element. So here we go. There's a whole bunch of different things. Grids and controls, buttons that you can take a look at. How to add a button to your thing and make them look really nice. Menus and drop-down menus and top bars. A lot of the same stuff that you'll see in Bootstrap. I will be 100% honest that I am approaching Foundation with zero knowledge of it whatsoever, although I am teaching it. Because I haven't used it, but I do know that it is very similar in approach to Bootstrap and offers you a lot of the same stuff. And another thing that I do know is that, like Bootstrap, you can go ahead and download Foundation, which is a collection of CSS and JavaScript files, and just start implementing them into your stuff and just making use of them. But unlike Bootstrap, it also comes with something called the Foundation CLI. Foundation command line installer, command line interface, CLI, that's what CLI stands for, allows you to install or create a new project, that's the title of this class, start a new project with Foundation installed and ready for you to use with a single command, and that's why we talked about the command line before we started. What you can go ahead and do is install Foundation CLI, which stands for, again, command line interface, which allows you to create a new Foundation project, which is to say a folder with an HTML file, CSS files, JavaScript files, and the ability to keep it up to date, to make changes to specific things called SCSS files, SAS files, which are kind of like CSS but a little bit better, but will translate into CSS when it reaches the browser. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of cool stuff we can do here. You don't need to read this whole thing, you just need to follow along with me because we are going to go ahead and create a new Foundation project. So, in my terminal, I'm going to go into a certain place. For me, I'm going to go into my Series 10 class. Oh, I don't have a class 8 folder yet. Maker class 8. So you can do the same. Don't do it inside my downloaded version of FWD. Do it inside your own project area. Create a new project for a new folder for today's class. Do whatever you want. And I'm going to go ahead and type Foundation new. So it gives me a little prompt. What are you building today? And we've got a little Zork Grand Inquisitor thing that we can choose here. I'm going to go ahead and say a website, not a web app. What's the difference between a website and a web app? Not much. But really, what the answer is: do you want basic mode or advanced mode? Well, let's stick with basic mode. It's gonna install slightly less, make it a little bit more bare bones. Whereas this app is going to make a few more assumptions about how you want to do some development, which I don't really want to get into today. So we're going to create a new site. And what's the project called? I don't care. Call it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine, Foundation Test, something like that. Do I want a basic template or a reserved template? I'm going to stick with the basic template. This thing is going to cause it to be a little more complicated than we want. It has templating and other sorts of stuff. Templating is cool, but I think it's a little bit too soon for us to talk about that. So just basic template. And now this is going to take a little while, maybe a minute, to go ahead and install a whole bunch of stuff that's necessary for this thing to load. You'd think that you already did the installation, but now with those choices you made, it has to install a few extra things, a few extra dependencies. Yeah?
Sorry, if I'm having trouble in my terminal directory, is there a way to just download this to my desktop so I'm not trying to navigate?
Not really, because it's generating something specific. Like we just went through a little wizard, a little thing to custom generate something with a specific name, whatever else. So that's why I wanted us to all do this. What is the problem that you're having specifically?
It says command not found.
Command. So I'm not sure if you got here late, but did you do this?
No, because it said that it would erase something on my hard drive.
No, it's not going to do that.
Okay.
So
I did the same, and I'm still getting command not found. Or I did this and it's still getting
you ran
sudo.
npm install -g foundation CLI.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And can I see?
Yeah. This is after I tried running it again.
You forgot to type install. Whenever you see a usage response, that means that you did it wrong.
So it's
Try again. Sudo npm install -g. You're missing install in the command that you ran.
thank you.
You're having a problem? Okay. Yes, enter your password.
So my laptop password.
Yes. Yeah.
Is it different?
Yes.
I didn't see what you did after. What are you building?
Oh, website.
Just select it.
Yep. Just press enter.
Thanks.
Anyone else have any issues? Yes, you can find that. Okay, so you didn't install Node.js. Did you do the first step?
I thought I did it.
Maybe you downloaded it but didn't install it. Did you actually run the installer? Okay, look for the installer and go ahead and install
Do I have to run this for every folder that I make?
it. No, once you do an npm install -g foundation CLI, you will have access to it in every folder. The -g stands for global, which means that you will have access to foundation anywhere, no matter what folder you're in.
Okay.
Yeah, the way that the command line works is that you have a series of different applications or programs that you have access to, regardless of where you are in your entire system. So you can run a whole bunch of commands, such as npm or foundation, which you're installing right now, which you'll have access to regardless of what folder you're in.
Is
So,
there any downside to accidentally installing it twice?
No.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Should we use the basic template?
Yeah. So I would pretty much just choose all the first options that you get. So yeah, if you're walking through the foundation installer, my things were a website, basic template, give it a name of whatever. I gave it foundation test, doesn't matter, and went ahead and printed all this stuff out.
Yes, I see this.
Oh my god. So even if it says this is hardware computer, we're going to download this.
Yes. Yeah. Basically, you should be wary of downloading stuff from the internet. That is why Mac computers nowadays come with the App Store, which is where you're generally installing stuff that Apple has generally, said like this is okay. But when you download stuff from the internet, Mac OS makes sure that you know what you're doing. And fortunately, since I'm here, you do know what you're doing, which is downloading Node.js from the correct place, installing it, everything's going to be good. Unless you misspelled something like Node.jx, and all of a sudden you're on some fake site in which you downloaded the wrong thing, and now all your files are gone. So, yeah. When it says it could harm your computer, that is true of anything you download from the internet, but you're downloading it from a trusted place in a less than trusted space. Unfortunately, it's got an HTTPS in the URL, so you're probably sure that you've got the right thing. All right. Again, this is stuff that you could have talked to me about a little earlier during the setup period, because it definitely was a prerequisite to this class. Yeah. Okay, so as you can see, this is guiding you along with the next step, which is what's specifically what we're going to do. Run foundation watch while inside the foundation test folder. So the first thing we need to do is go into the foundation test folder. Of course, you guys can't do that yet because you need to install Node.js and you need to install foundation CLI. Then you need to run that whole sort of thing. So yeah, go ahead and keep doing that if you're doing it. Yep. So up next, we got this foundation test folder here. So we've got a lot of stuff here, a lot more than we've dealt with previously. An easier way to look at this, and especially if you're using Mac OS, is just to do open space dot, and it'll just open up this folder. To do the same thing in Windows, you do Explorer space dot. I'm not sure how you do it in Linux. But let's take a look at what we've got here. First two things is something called Bower components. And it's gone ahead and installed foundation sites and jQuery and Motion UI and what input. I don't really know what all those things are, but fortunately, that's okay because we're just kind of working with the defaults that foundation has installed for us. Bower, specifically, is the name of a package manager for front-end assets. A package manager for the web. What Bower does is installs certain packages that you might find useful for to use with your website. It's essentially JavaScript modules that are specifically for use on the web versus modules that are also potentially for use outside of the web within a Node environment, not inside the web browser. So having said that, while this has gone ahead and installed some Bower assets, and Bower I think is just fine, a lot of people have started to sort of pull away from using this because there's another package manager, which you already have installed, called npm, Node Package Manager, which not only installs backend Node JavaScript stuff, but it also installs front-end stuff. So it essentially does everything Bower does plus more, so people are finding that there's not much of a reason to use Bower anymore. That said, you don't have to worry about it because that's just something that Foundation is using behind the scenes. If it so happens somewhere down the line that Foundation decides to ditch this and use something else, then whatever, just go with the flow. Anyway, changelog. This is a little file that you can go ahead and make changes to and say, hey, here's some stuff that I've changed as I go along. Or you can ignore it. I usually ignore them. Etsy, etc. It's a blank folder. I don't know why it's there. Gulp file is a special JavaScript file that is used within Node, not within your browser, which is meant to basically determine how Sass should be run on your site. I haven't even talked about Sass yet. I might as well really quick right now. I will talk about it again sometime later. But Sass is CSS with superpowers. It's the best way of describing it. Sass is a language that looks a lot like CSS, but has more features. The downside of Sass is that browsers don't understand it. They can't run Sass. So what things like this thing that you just installed do, yes, what they do is take those Sass, well, that's really cute. That's a colon and that's a semicolon. They take that Sass, they take the Sass code and turn it into CSS before it reaches the browser. They do something called preprocessing, so it can go. So essentially, we have a little tool that's been installed along with Foundation that is going to watch for changes to our Sass files. And every time we've saved one of those files, it's going to immediately create a CSS version of them that our browser can use. This sounds a little over the top, a little strange. Like, why, if we have to go through that whole song and dance, why don't we just use CSS? And sure, you can use CSS, but you'll find down the line, especially when we talk about this in future classes, that using Sass makes things better. It just provides us with more functionality, more features, an easier way of writing certain things. So. In order to use it, there's another little command that we want to use called foundation watch. What foundation watch is going to do is run this Sass thing and then run default. And what this default thing does is just go ahead and watch for any changes to your Sass files. And if those things change, it's going to go ahead and update your CSS. So we're essentially done with this terminal. Once we reach this step, we're just going to leave it like this. As you can see, you can't really, well, you can type stuff in, but it's not going to do anything because we're in the middle of having this watch thing. So essentially, this program, Foundation Watch, has taken over this terminal. If you ever want to turn this off, close this, you can just do a Control, not Command, but a Control-C, and that will quit this. And so you can do another command again. That's how you quit a process that has taken control of your terminal. But yeah, Foundation Watch, we're just going to leave it like that for now.
Sorry, if we haven't created that yet, if we didn't get the command to create the site,
Yes.
can we type that as work?
No, you can't. You need to catch up, or you need to just watch this and do it later. But I do want to know where you guys are at this point.
We installed the
Yeah. Foundation, cool. Did you run Foundation new?
No.
Okay, that's the next step. Go ahead and just run this Foundation new, and it's going to run you through that little wizard. Like, what do you want to create? Choose the first options for everything. Type in whatever name of the project you want. Just follow the prompt. Okay. So as we're letting this run and just do whatever it wants, we've created a new CSS folder here, and it contains app.css. I recommend, if we're going to make changes to this project, that you don't touch this CSS folder. This CSS folder is an artifact of this watch command happening. Any changes that you make to this CSS folder are going to be overwritten by any changes that are happening within this SCSS folder. So essentially, this is your source, and this is your destination. Or this is your source, and this is your built material. So I know that's a little confusing, but you know, from here on, if we are going to make any changes to the SAS, which in this class I don't think we are, we're going to want to make changes to one of these two files. Either one really suffices, but it looks like CSS mostly, but there's also a lot of different sorts of things that start with $signs. So, you know, wow, actually none of that looks similar. Looks familiar, but whatever. Let's continue. There's also a JavaScript folder which contains app.js. App.js has a single line of JavaScript which says document.foundation. I think what this is doing, I actually don't know, but I'm pretty sure what's going on here is, well, the first thing is jQuery is getting called. You see the little $, and it's surrounding something called the document. The document is a variable that is available within every web page, regardless of whether you're using Foundation, regardless of whether you're using jQuery. On any page in the entire internet, you can open up a console and take a look at document, and it's this thing that contains your entire site. So when we surround the document with jQuery, we are now able to chain those jQuery commands on top of it. And one thing that Foundation has given us is a special method called Foundation. And I think what that means is that it's just going to basically let Foundation, this big HTML, CSS, JavaScript framework, take control of the entire site and, you know, make changes to any component that needs to be made changes to, make things interactive that needs to be made interactive, etc. So that's what's happening inside our JS folder. Node modules is very much like Bower components. It's another thing full of stuff we don't really have to care about. These are backend dependencies, backend modules, whereas these are front-end modules. That is to say, this is stuff that's going to be loaded up in the browser, whereas this is stuff that our Foundation watch task or Foundation new or Foundation whatever is going to make use of. Package.json is another sort of informational thing that contains some information about how this thing is put together. This is where you can name your project, give it a version number, make a description, and then a little more programmatic stuff about what's necessary for this project to run. Package.json is something that you'll see in every node module, every node project. So, you know, maybe it's a little bit out of the scope for this class, but it is something worth understanding. Basically, what it is, why it's there. But again, we're not really going to touch it. README is pretty much just what we did. We went ahead and we installed Foundation CLI, we created a new thing, and manual setup is another way of setting this whole thing up. Yeah, so that's essentially it. And we are left with index.html, which we can just open. Okay, so this file has been generated for us. By doing that Foundation new blah blah blah, we have this index.html file, which when opened contains a whole bunch of stuff. And this is a really good little kitchen sink, that is to say, collection of everything that Foundation gives us. For one thing, we've got some nice typography. Unlike the usual Times New Roman sites that we start with, this has some nice Helvetica, a good big heading, a smaller heading. We've got this nice border around here. We have five items which are laid out in a nice grid that's kind of responsive as we make it bigger or smaller. That's kind of cool. We have a nice color for these links. And what else? Here are two columns, column 1 and column 2. This is the heading of column 1, and it contains boxes that are explaining that you can break things out into different columns. Also has a form, and this form has a nice hover state as you type into them. Looks a lot better than the Twitter thing that we were making earlier because, you know, there's a lot of padding within these things. Nice bigger font when we type stuff in. A little thing that appears at the end like .com, so we can make sure that we're, you know, not having to type in hello.com.com, you know, something like that. Just a little hint of what you don't need to type in. Nice select box, radio buttons that look nicer than the default, check boxes, text area, which can still be resized, you know. Different buttons, a little, I'm not sure what they call this, a little card or a panel inside here that has a little call to action underneath it. So yeah, these are all little components that you can use with Foundation. And you know, if you're ever curious about specifically how to use it, how to do it, well, the first thing to do is take a look at the source. The cool thing about a framework like Foundation or like Bootstrap is that essentially it's all class-based. You're just going to be creating a lot of divs or you know, divs. Div class row, div class large 12 columns, div class callout. And each one of these things has a different meaning. For example, large 12. What does large 12 mean? Well, let's talk about grid systems. You've been on websites where there are multiple columns. Sometimes there are 2 columns, sometimes there are 3, sometimes there are 4, sometimes there are 6, sometimes there are 12, sometimes there are a lot of different things out there. Columns are often laid out on a site in grids of 12. Why 12? Well, think about the number 12. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 12 divided by 3 is 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3. 12 divided by 6 is 2. So 12 divided by 2 is, yes, 6, right, sorry. Yes, math. But those are all really nice, even, you know, nice numbers. So that means that 12 is a really great number to be able to create a grid system out of, because you can have 2 by 2, 3 by 3, etc. So if we inspect one of these things, like this 12-column section in a row, we see that it has a class of large 12. Whoops, I just went to my Google Hangouts thing. Let me minimize that. Okay, and as you can see within app.css, which is something that we didn't write any CSS, of course, but this is coming to us from Foundation, anything with a class of large 12 has a width of 100%. Well, that's okay. Most divs have already have a width of 100%. So what's the deal? Well, inside here we've got large 6, which has a width of 50. Let's see. Large 4. Great. 4, 4, 4. So why large 4? Why medium 4? Why small 4? Well, another thing that Bootstrap helps us out with is making our site responsive. I'm going to have a class later on when I talk about CSS in depth about what responsive design is, but it's essentially the concept where a site that you create not only looks good in your laptop, but it also looks good in the majority of devices out there, otherwise known as phones. There are many, many more phones and tablets out there than there are laptops. That might sound crazy because it wasn't the case like 2 or 3 years ago, but it is now. So even though you don't realize it, if you want to become a web developer, you are going to be developing websites for phones first and foremost, then desktop computers. So the good thing is about Foundation is that it comes with these classes that change certain things based on the width of the page. This is not a really great example because in all situations, this 4 columns thing takes up 33% no matter how big. What?
It had the 6 columns from next to
It did. You're right. So I should demonstrate that instead. Yeah, you can see here large 6, medium 6, but it doesn't have a class of small 6. So that means that once the window becomes adequately small, and Foundation probably has some arbitrary idea of what small means. Small probably means below a width of 64M. 64M is essentially 64 line-like characters going across the screen. So once it goes below 64, then it's no longer width 60. It just stretches all the way across. So 6 right here is 2 by 2, but essentially at this point it goes from 2 to 1. See how these 2 6-column things have become wider? So that's the idea of this grid system where specific classes provided to us by Foundation make things a certain width. Okay, onto this stuff, input label here. This input is inside a div with a class of large 12 columns. But more specifically, the deal with these inputs is that due to the fact that Foundation has loaded its CSS file into this document, any input that has a type of text, password, date time local, month, week, email, number, search, tell, time, URL, color, or text area will have all of these properties applied to it. A nice border, a certain width and a height and padding and all that stuff. All this is stuff that you don't have to write yourself, all this crazy CSS, because Foundation is given it to you for free. You might ask yourself, wait, I don't want it to look like that. I want to change it. Well, for one thing, kind of the idea of Foundation is that you just want to kind of stick with the basics. But if you do want to build more stuff, this or changing the grids or changing anything on this entire page, you're still free to do that because you have the ability to simply just open up app.scss, go down to the bottom here, and then just start writing some CSS. Body, background, red. Save this, reload the page, and the background's red. So, you know, all the same stuff still applies. You can just start writing some stuff. But all this crazy includey stuff up here is just Foundation making use of Sass to install a whole bunch of different sorts of features, CSS styles for things like tables, things like tags, things like sliders, and pagination to be able to go from page 1 to page 2, etc. So the idea behind this CSS file here is that you can make use of however much you want or get rid of things you don't need and just like slim down your CSS file. So that's another example of essentially Foundation giving you the world and allowing you to just take away pieces you don't want or add in pieces you do want, do whatever you want, really. Yeah. By the way, if we go back over here, you'll notice that a few more starting Sass things started up. And they just happened a minute ago, 2041. That's because I made a change to the Sass file, and this Foundation watch thing noticed that it changed and created a new CSS file with those changes. So again, remember, this Sass file that I'm making edits to is not actually what gets loaded up in the browser. Foundation Watch goes ahead and takes it and creates a new app.css, which then shows up in the browser. So that's another thing that we kind of have given to us for free. Yeah, so, I mean, the list goes on. There's a lot of different stuff that you can go ahead and create here. You could just as easily create a new HTML file. You can copy and paste this, you know, create about.html, and have index.html linked to about.html. Why not? You might as well, right? And if we open up one of these and take a look, it's already given us a nice doc type, HTML, head, body. It's loading up the proper app.css. It's giving us a little media query thingo, which we don't have to talk about, making things look good in older versions of Internet Explorer, giving us a title, which we can change if we want to. Obviously, we don't want our title to become Foundation for Sites for our website. And then a whole bunch of HTML that we can work off of. I believe that working off of previously written code is the way to program. That sounds really cheap and kind of silly and like sort of like not very creative, but the best advice that I can give you is to not be creative when it comes to writing code. If someone has already created a solution then go ahead and use that rather than trying to solve it yourself. The idea behind working on these sorts of things is that, and I'm not encouraging you to steal. This is not stealing. This is making use of an MIT licensed open source library that is meant for you to use, for you to be sped along with your work. So the great thing about Foundation, and the great thing about this little template that's been given to us, is that we can just go ahead and start making changes to this page and turn it into our own thing. Say we don't want a heading, get rid of it. Say we want 2 of these boxes, copy and paste it. Say we want some stuff that's not inside this little boilerplate here, go into Foundation documentation, take a look at some other stuff we can add in, like a menu. Oh, we want to add a menu. Cool. So let's go ahead and copy and paste this. Put it here at the top of index.html, maybe, I don't know, right here at the very top of our body. And then, where is it? Did I get rid of it? I must have. Let me open it up again. All of a sudden, we've got a little menu. not that pretty, but at least it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, in order, one after another. Great. Or we can have, and it looks exactly like this. Or we can have a menu that has an alignment to the right, so all the items go like that instead. Or we can have a centered menu. Or we can have menus that are all over the place, or vertical, or whatever. You just basically add this stuff, copy and paste it, make sure this class comes along with it, and now we've got it simple, or nested, or have one where certain things are active. You add a class of active to the thing that you want to be highlighted like this, and Bob's your uncle. I mean, that's how it works. You just basically copy and paste stuff here, throw it in there, and you've got a whole bunch of different little HTML snippets which look great and work great. Because it might not be apparent here, but there are certain aspects to some of these components that you can drag in that require some JavaScript. See a little JS thing there? So for example, this drop-down menu, when you click it, it opens up a little drop-down. That's really cool. But this sort of functionality is something that can only be done using JavaScript, for the most part. In a later class, I talk about doing this kind of with CSS, but the great thing is that if you want it to work, the good thing is that this little foundation boilerplate that we've created using the foundation new command already comes with all that JavaScript included. So if we want this sort of drop-down menu instead, let's just replace the menu with a drop-down menu. It's actually still a menu, as you can see, because this class attribute, remember that whenever you see a space inside this class attribute, it means it has two classes. It's a drop-down, and it's a menu. But it also has this special little attribute called data drop-down menu. That's a little hook for Foundation to go into the page and say, oh, that's something that I need to add a little bit of additional magic to. I'm going to essentially add my own little interaction to it and make it just work. Make it so if you click on item 1, that this little menu opens without you having to write any JavaScript whatsoever. So let's see what it looks like. Item 1. Check it out. It just works. Cool. And again, all I did was copy and paste. That's great. So, I mean, if for example, your client comes back to you and says, actually, I want it to, magically just unfold very, very gracefully, and also have a specific roundedness and color and background and so, and do all these sorts of additional special things that Foundation doesn't have built in, then maybe Foundation is not the right thing for you. But if it's not, if you're doing something for yourself, if you're just looking to make a nice, clean-looking page that is functional, usable, that just drives the point home, then something like Foundation is still great. And like I said, if you do want to build something on top of it, then by all means. But I do have a little caveat about that. Again, we haven't even started talking about CSS and all the different sorts of stuff you can do. I used to teach CSS first and then JavaScript, but I realized that talking about JavaScript first is something that's a little bit more in demand nowadays, because pretty much every front-end job requires that you do something JavaScript related nowadays. When I started using Bootstrap, and again, I haven't used Foundation, but it's very similar. When I started using Bootstrap, I started thinking, okay, every project that I'm going to create is going to start with Bootstrap, because it's going to give me a good starting point of what buttons should look like, what form elements should look like, what, all the best practices are all going to be built in. But I realized after a while that trying to make it look like what the client wanted it to look like, specifically, what the job of a front-end laborer making a nicely designed website is they take the design from the designer, and then they go ahead and piece by piece turn that into code. Write the HTML, write the CSS. But if you're starting off with something that's got all these preconceived notions of how certain things should look, then you're going to probably have a bad time in trying to override all the stuff that someone has already done, all the work that someone else has already done. And you're going to end up, and I've done this more than once before, creating this big kind of CSS canopy that sits on top of some already built CSS. And eventually you're going to say, well, maybe I don't even need Bootstrap or Foundation anymore, and try to remove that. And all of a sudden you've got this kind of brittle, again, canopy of CSS that's not sitting on top of anything. So again, what I'm trying to say is that Foundation is really great because it gives you a great head start. It gives you a lot of styling, a lot of behavior, a lot of stuff that you're going to see all across the web. But is it great for every project? Is it great for every high-touch, specific, very, very specifically branded, specific interaction-based sort of thing? No, not necessarily. And again, is Bootstrap the only choice? No, there's Foundation. There's also Material Design Lite, which is a library that gives you a whole bunch of components which look like things from a Google app. I don't know. All these things are meant to look like things that you would find on Google stuff, Google Inbox, Google Plus, Google Maps, Google whatever. So this is just another example of another library where essentially you just install the CSS, install the JavaScript, and then just copy and paste the. I guess this comes with CSS. So you just copy and paste this entire thing, and all of a sudden you're in business because you've got this good-looking stuff, and you didn't have to write anything yourself, right? Any CSS or JavaScript yourself. So that is, essentially what I wanted to talk about when I'm talking about starting a new project. And if you find later on that you don't want to use Foundation, then you can easily get rid of it. How do you get rid of Foundation once it's already installed? Well, pretty simple. Get rid of this. No more app.css. Get rid of this, app.js, and all these different components as well, unless you want to hold on to jQuery for some reason. And then, go back here, reload the page, and you've just got a whole bunch of HTML, and you can do whatever you want with it. Or you can remove the HTML as well. You've still got a nice little structure where you've got your HTML file here, your JavaScript inside here, your CSS inside here that can be changed into CSS. Or you can just not run Foundation Watch anymore, get rid of SCSS, and just refer to the CSS file from now on. So you can essentially take it with you. You can eject it. You can make it your own. But this is just one example of many different sorts of boilerplates out there. While I have the time, I might as well also talk about one of the first boilerplates that I used, which is still probably very relevant, called HTML5 boilerplate. The world's most popular front-end template. HTML5 boilerplate is pretty much just what it's the same. It's a folder of pretty much all that stuff that I just showed you. It's got a JS file, a CSS folder. It's got index, but it's also got a few other things, and it's a great way of getting started. But it has even fewer assumptions about how things are going to start up. For one thing, it's not an application that you run to generate something. It is just a folder. Here is your project. Start working on it right now. That's it. But it's got, like I said, there's a CSS folder, a JS folder, a folder for images. It's got a 404 thing in case you want to make your file not found folder look good. It's got a little license where you can write whatever license you want. Starts off with an HTML5 boilerplate copyright. This HTML file, what does it have inside it? Let's see. Hello world. It's got a few scripts that load up jQuery and a few plugins if you want to load those up. It's got a little Google Analytics snippet in case you want to load up Google Analytics. Google Analytics is a service that shows you who's been visiting your site once you put this on the web, and you can get insights on page views and whether people have gone through specific conversion funnels or other sorts of marketing SEO type stuff, or you can get rid of it. So, but here it is, a basic HTML file which has some good stuff in it. Also comes with something called Normalize, something called Modernizer, which sort of makes things work across the board, makes things look very plain and simple. But yeah, ta-da, that's it. That's all that HTML5 boilerplate is. But it just, makes it so you don't have to write your HTML file and create all your individual files. You just have a good place to start. So that's really all it takes to create a new project. You just go ahead and start one of these boilerplates, or not, and then just start writing. That's it. I don't really have that much else to talk about because, like I said, I'm not 100% familiar with Foundation. I have made sites before that have made use of a few bootstrappy sorts of things, but I'm not really sure if yeah, I'm trying to think. Yes, yes.
Okay, so when you're playing around like that,
Mhm.
like, and adding and dropping stuff, is there like a good style to where you're adding stuff? Because like, I can kind of see myself getting carried away.
Not really. That's a good question. I mean, although Foundation and Bootstrap and Material Design Lite or whatever are going for a specific look, it's still up to you to have a general concept of, well, how the average page is laid out. You probably usually have your nav bar at the top and not in the middle of the page. You probably have, introductory thing at the very top of your page or whatever, right? In Bootstrap lingo, there's this idea of a jumbotron, which is this big area at the top of the page that gives you something. Is it still called jumbotron? I guess well, I thought it would be. Huh. Masthead? Well, they call it a masthead, but it's also called like a hero or hero, responsive, overview, grid system, typography. What am I talking about here? I'm trying to look for Bootstrap heading. Code, tables, forms, buttons. What is it? Is it inside components? Glyph icons, drop downs. The jumbotron, right? Ta-da! Look, a little thing that you usually see at the top of the site, right? So your question kind of delves into the world of web design, really, if you think about it, because you're still responsible for laying out what you want your content to be and how you want your site to read and how you want it to look from top to bottom, even when you're using something like Bootstrap, where to use specific sorts of things. And I mean, there are some examples. There are some, like, let's see, Expo. What is Expo? Beautiful and inspiring uses of Bootstrap. So here are some inspiring uses. The funny thing about most of these things is that they're so different looking than Bootstrap that I think that they started with it, and then they're like, oh, okay, I'm going to completely get rid of everything and make it look entirely different. So this is very silly to me. This is probably, I don't really see why the majority of these sites really needed Bootstrap in the first place. Because, again, this does not look like this. This does not look like a Bootstrap site or something that's got a very straightforward design. So probably these silly developers started with this, and they're like, oh, now where do I go from here? And I would posit that Bootstrap probably at some point became more of a hindrance than it became more of a help, because you often at that point want that sort of specific little intimate interaction with everything that you do, so you might as well write it yourself. But again, I can't really answer that question for you. All I can say is just take a look at how other websites look, get some ideas about, well, you got your nav bar, you got your jumbotron, you've got details underneath that, you've got your footer that has a copyright and links to other pages on the site, that sort of stuff. And beyond that, I really can't give much more information because it's on a case-by-case basis. You have certain stuff that you want to convey, and But all I can say though is that obviously you don't want to paste. Well, like let's say that we've got something like a jumbotron. This jumbotron here, if we take a look at the HTML behind it, div class jumbotron, hello world, paragraph, a button. You obviously don't want to put stuff. If you want to put something inside the jumbotron, you don't want to put. Excuse me. Pardon me. You don't want to put it right here, right? You want to put it in here. Do you want to put it above the heading, below the heading? Probably below the heading. Do you need a heading inside here? No. This is just an example of what you can and can't do. But you can get rid of these things. But like you can also create a container. The idea of a container is just something that prevents it from going full bleed across your entire site. That's another thing from a web design perspective you might want to know about, which is that certain sites are centered to the middle. They don't stretch across the entire site. I mean, you name it, any website on the internet is not going to stretch all the way to the very, very ends. So that means that it must have a container that's preventing it from stretching all the way across. If I were to zoom out, you can see what I mean, right? So a lot of empty space, and that's intentional. So yeah, you know, I mean, there are certain motifs and certain sorts of ideas, concepts that you'll want to understand. And the good thing about the documentation of Foundation and Bootstrap, one or the other, you know, can give you an idea. Kitchen sink, everything on one page. This is everything here, you know. But you know, Foundation also gives the idea of this sidebar on the left, main area. That's the idea of the grid that they've got, where you've got this, I don't know, large 2, large 10, right? This takes up 2 of the 12. This takes up 10 of the 12, or something like that. That's actually me just guessing, but I could probably just, let's see. There we go, large 2. I was right. See, and then this thing is large 10, which for some reason comes before it. I don't know why. Oh, it's because it's got pull 9. Yeah, these weird pull things go ahead and kind of reverse the order of them. I'm not sure. You can read more about it in the documentation. So there's all that. Really quick, just want to make sure no one's saying anything online. Is anyone tuned in online? Really quick. Yeah, one's here. Cool. Yeah. So, yeah, you've started a project. Where to go from there? Once you start your project and start working on your project, you probably want your project to go online somewhere so people can see it, and that will be the talk for next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about uploading your site, file transfer. We're going to talk about HTTP, about how servers and browsers communicate with one another. And then we're also going to learn about SFTP and also Git hosting, where we're able to simply use Git to put stuff online that people can see, GitHub specifically. So, you know, once we've created a project like this and, you know, used Foundation Watch or whatever to create the final CSS and possibly JavaScript and HTML that we all want to create, then we can go ahead and push it up online one way or another. So that's next week. Yeah, I know the class hasn't really gone for much, but I kind of run out of stuff to talk about in terms of like how to get started, because we just got started. You know, that's pretty much it. Let me see. Further reading, further ideas. Something that I should probably talk about is so this Foundation CLI thing is it creates a static site. That is to say, what's a static site? A static site is something that is just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. A not so static site is something that needs a server backing it in order for it to run properly. What I mean by that is it's a website that requires a database in order to run. Something that needs to pull some information every time the page loads to display some new HTML. The idea behind the web in general is that these servers that are running all the time are sending HTML and oftentimes CSS and JavaScript to you that are customized specifically for you, based on who you're logged in as, and you know, what time of day it is, and what the latest news articles are, and whatever else. All throughout the internet, these things are being generated on the fly as you request them, and that means that there must be some sort of server that's generating that stuff for you. And that's the idea of a dynamic website, a site that has something running behind it. Whereas a static website is something that is just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but using the tool like that Foundation Watch thing, or whatever else, we can go ahead and use special preprocessor languages like Sass, and later on we'll talk about things like Babel ES6, so a more modern version of JavaScript that doesn't work in browsers, but we can compile it into one that does. Instead of just talking about HTML, talking about templating, talking about being able to use the same parts of an HTML file to generate multiple HTML files, instead of having to copy and paste our header and our footer over and over into every single file over and over. But at the end of the day, being able to generate them into static sites so we can upload them to places that don't need some sort of database running 24/7 in order for the site to actually just work. So that's stuff we will also be talking about in the future. There's also a website called Static Den, Top Open Source Static Site Generators. The most popular being Jekyll by far, but also things like Gitbook, Hexo, Hugo. Middleman I've taught in this class before. I've also taught Harp in the previous one. Also Brunch is something that I like. Some of these are based in Ruby. That is to say, you need to install Ruby on your machine in order for it to work. Or in this case, you need to install Go in order to work. Or you need to install JavaScript. Unfortunately, Node, that means you have installed JavaScript on your machine. But the deal with the majority of these things is that they're a little bit more complicated than I would like, which is why I taught this using just the built-in foundation thing that generates stuff for you. The cool thing about a lot of these things is that they do all this Sass stuff for you. They do all the special new Babel-y stuff. They not only do that, but once it comes time to build your code and upload it somewhere, they uglify your code. What I mean by that is sorry, uglify isn't the right word. They minify it. They make it really compressed and compact. So it's easy to put online. So it's a smaller sort of payload to put on the internet. But again, a lot of these, and there's also templating languages, EJS, and Liquid, and Jinja, and a whole bunch of stuff out there that makes it easy to write certain HTML templates, which can then be compiled. But again, I think that I'm rambling at this point. There's just a lot of stuff out there, and it kind of goes beyond the scope of what I can really talk about in a single thing. But if you are looking to get a little bit more complicated than just this foundation thing that creates CSS out of Sass for you, then this is a good place to start, because a lot of these things have pretty good documentation that explains how to take it a little bit further. Yeah?
Can you give us just a couple of general examples of what you use Sass for that's better than just CSS?
Yeah, I might as well, since I have the time, if everyone's okay with sticking around for a second. Let's take a look at what Sass can do. So, can I do this? All right. So, yeah, here's a simple example. Here's some CSS. We specified that the font for the body is going to be Helvetica. It's going to be sans serif. It's going to have a color of 333, kind of a dark gray. But setting it right here, what if down the line we also want something else on the page to also be that same color of dark gray? We would have to copy and paste 333 somewhere else in our code. Then what if the designer comes back and says, actually, we're changing our brand a little bit. We're no longer using this dark color for our text. We're going to use 666 instead, which is also kind of a slightly less dark gray. Then you have to change it there. You have to change it there. You have to change it there. You have to change it all over the place. Sass, or SCSS, which stands literally for Sassy CSS, has variables. So you can create something like primary color. And then instead of having to change it all over the place, you only change it once. And every place that you want to use 333, you just use primary color instead. And then you change it once, it gets changed everywhere, and then it gets compiled into this. There's nesting. In CSS, we've talked about nesting, where you say like nav UL, nav LI, nav A, where it's the UL inside the nav, or the LI inside the nav, or the A inside the nav. That's a little bit of repetition that you can't avoid with regular CSS. You have to write nav, nav, nav over and over, even though all these things are obviously supposed to apply to, the LI, which is part of the UL, which is inside the nav, the A, which is inside the nav. In SCSS, you can just write nav once, and then write rules for UL, LI, and A inside the nav rule. So that's rule nesting. That's another thing that Sass gives you. Partials. You can import different Sass files into one Sass file into a different one, which will result in a bigger CSS file. Importing, kind of the same thing. I don't actually know the difference between partials and imports, so I'll just skip that. Mixins. Mixins are essentially like functions in Sass, where you can essentially create a little thing that generates a number of lines of CSS out of a single use. Like, for example, we want every box to have a border radius of 10 pixels. But border radius in some older browsers needs to be listed out multiple times in order to work. So this is what it turns into when you're all done, but all you had to write was include border radius just once. So that generates multiple lines of CSS from a single little include statement, which is part of Sass. There's also extending, which is similar, where certain things, like this success can extend message. It starts with these three things and adds a border color of green. So success has a border color of green, but it also has all these three things because success has been added here. So, these are all the different sorts of things. Operators as well, it can do math. So if you're trying to, if you want to multiply some variables or divide them or whatever else, you can do that, and it'll result in the actual result, which is 62.5 out of this, right? So that's stuff that Sass has that CSS does not have built in. I should also note, though, that not everybody is on the Sass train. Especially nowadays, Sass is slightly falling by the wayside in favor of something called post-CSS. Post-CSS allows you to write essentially your own custom version of CSS, which goes through a number of different steps of post-processing, where after you've written it, it gets changed to the point where it can be read by the browser. So in a lot of ways, it's very much like Sass, but you can define specifically which steps it goes through. You can say that you want every rule that makes something green changes it to red instead. You can say that you want certain rules that don't work in certain browsers to work in other browsers in a different way. A lot of different sorts of little passes that your CSS can go through to turn into something different. So it's basically the idea where, like, you're writing what could be valid, but you define specifically what steps you want. Whereas Sass is kind of like a one-size-fits-all, like overall different language. So anyway, there's a lot of different approaches, and that's just kind of how it goes. But that's what Sass can do. And again, I'll pretty much go over that again in a later class where I talk about CSS. But whatever, it's fine. Any other questions? No questions online. Any other thoughts about all this stuff? We have a lot of time to talk about it. If anyone has any questions.
If I understand you correctly, I can like make a page green here and maybe blue here in a different browser. Or?
Not necessarily. I mean, your browser on your phone, your browser on your computer are pretty much the same browser. They all understand HTML, CSS, JavaScript. What I was just talking about was writing some code that isn't readable by any browser, but then goes through a number of steps to be readable by browsers. So it's kind of like Sass, but it's a slightly different approach to it, where there are certain features that you apply that it's essentially rolling your own Sass, rolling your own series of different things that you want to transform before it turns into the final CSS that you then load up in your browser. But no, that doesn't mean anything about like showing up differently depending on what the kind of thing it is. But earlier in the class I did talk about responsiveness, where based on how big the page is, it can look differently just based on the width of the page. That's something where you can write some CSS that only applies within certain media, within certain widths. And I will talk about that in a later class. We will, once we start talking further in depth about CSS, we'll start with a blog page that was built only for the desktop for some reason, and then turn it into something that can be loaded by any browser. That is not to say that the browser on your phone wouldn't be able to load it, but it would just not look very good. You've probably all seen been on sites where you need to zoom in before you can actually use it, right? That's archaic. That's old. That's people not doing their due diligence and making pages to load for computers that are unlike theirs. Computers that are not the computers that are used mainly throughout the internet. By that I mean phones. So yeah. Yep. So any other questions? If you're having trouble installing all this stuff, then feel free to come to my lab on Thursdays where I can walk you further through it. I think getting this stuff set up, getting Node set up, generally is something that is good to know for web developers nowadays, just how to be able to install things using it. So yeah, to know about what's going on Thursday. I forget if I have a class related, if I have an assignment related to this class. I probably do, and the assignment is probably just create a. Oh yeah, well I have to rewrite this entire assignment because we're not doing Harp or Bootstrap. But yeah, so it'll be something similar to this, but we're using the Foundation CLI instead. So I'll send that out. That'll be done. That'll be available probably tomorrow, and you guys will be able to work on it throughout the week. We'll come to my lab on Thursdays, where at 7 p.m. on the classroom right behind me, where I can help you out with that. And then subscribe to one of these things and donate, and that's the class. Yep. So thanks for coming, and I'll see you guys on Thursday. Next week, next week's available, right? Nothing's crazy happening on Monday next week. I will talk again about file transfer, HTTP, SFTP, Git, all that stuff. Git again, all that stuff. Cool. All right. See you guys later, and have a good one. How do I close this thing? Anyway, thanks.